Okay, hello there, good evening everyone and welcome to Carlan Cymru revision sessions. This session will focus on AS psychology and will be presented by Miss Sophie Bellis from Allen School in Mold. The session will last around 45 minutes where the teacher will go through the relevant subject content with you. If you've got any questions, please use the question and answer section and we will endeavour to answer your questions during this session. The session will be recorded with the recording and any relevant resources uploaded to the e-sgol website in the Carlan Cymru area. So, Miss Bellis, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I just want to start by telling you what to expect in these psychology sessions. So we've got 4 sessions that will run every Wednesday. Obviously today, starting with looking at Rain and Bowlby's research. So I have centred these sessions around the studies that you need to look at within Unit 1, past to present, for this year. I've chosen to do these because they can be quite tricky and they are always your high marked answers. So it's always either 8 to 12 marks available for your classic studies. So it's really important that we understand them, but we also know how to write about them in an essay and where we get our marks from. So like I said, today's study that we're looking at are Rain and Bowlby, and we're going to look at the methodology and the procedure of these studies and have a little look at some essay templates as well. Okay, just quickly having a look at your exam then. So this is Unit 1, which is past to present, or you may know it as your approaches to psychology. Then you also have a Unit 2 exam as well, which looks at research methods. The Unit 1 exam, you will have compulsory questions related to 5 psychological approaches and classic pieces of research. Your 5 approaches are the biological approach, psychodynamic, behaviourist, cognitive and positive. And I'm hoping to cover the classic studies within each of these approaches. Today we're going to focus on the biological study and the psychodynamic study as well. This is just taken from your specification for this unit. You have an hour-and-a-half examination and it equates to 20% of your overall A-level and 50% of your Year 12 AS qualification. There's lots of things that you need to be able to do within this exam and within this unit, and they're listed here. So you need to be able to understand the assumptions of the approach, how to apply it to the formation of a relationship, understand how the approach can be used in a therapy, to know and understand the main components of that therapy, to be able to evaluate the therapy, look at its strengths and weaknesses and its effectiveness and ethical considerations, and then you need to be able to evaluate the whole approach. The bottom bullet point and the one in green is where I'm focusing this session today. Says know, understand and make judgments on a piece of classic evidence, including the methodology, the procedure, findings, conclusions and ethical issues and social implications. So there is quite a lot. There's a lot to do within the exam. So it's really, really clear that you understand exactly what you need to pull out from your notes to answer an exam question effectively. So that is what I'm going to do today. Okay, so focusing this around Rain and Bowlby's research. One of the studies will, maybe 1 or 2 of the studies will come up in the exam. You might not get a question on every single one of them, but they absolutely will be there. Possible exam questions that could come up are like the ones that are shown on the screen now. So question 1 says outline just the methodology of Rain, which could be a 3-mark question, which throws a lot of people really, because actually a methodology is quite a detailed section of Rain's study. So it's making sure, well, how do you What do you cut out for 3 marks? What's the most important? How do we write it for a 3-mark answer? There is the bottom one, number 3, says describe the methodology and procedure of RAIN. And that could be 10 marks. And then the middle one, which is the one I want to focus on today, is asking you to outline the methodology and procedure. So the command word at the start of the question is really important in you knowing the level of detail that you need to put in your answer. So question 2 and 3 are the same here, but the difference is that command. You're either asked to outline, which means that you're giving somebody an overview. What is it? What did they do? What methods did they use? And a description is describing why. Why is that important? Why did he choose that type of sampling method? So there's lots of different ways that you can approach this. And I'm going to go through what I think is probably the easiest way. So starting off with the methodology and the procedure. So the question is asking you to outline those things. Now, sometimes it's quite difficult in psychology to know the difference between the two words. What is a methodology and what is a procedure? So this is a way that I like to remember it. Your methodology is like your ingredients to your study. What's your sample? How old are your sample? How many are male? How many are female? Is there a control group? Was there anything specific that they had to do in order to have or take part in the study? Those are those little bits of knowledge that help you understand the components of the research. That's your methodology. The procedure acts like a recipe where you talk your examiner through exactly what steps the researcher did. Okay, so think of it like a recipe book. Your ingredients are what you need to carry out the study. Your recipe, your procedure is how you do it. So the question that we're going to be answering is at the top of almost all of these slides to give you something to reference back to. Okay, so starting off with RAIN's study. It was looking at a group of criminals. He wanted to know about the brains of murderers. What was it about their brains that was different and made them behave in that way? So his sample were individuals who had committed a murder but entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. So they were NGRI murderers. In your exam, you can write not guilty by reason of insanity and then abbreviate it with NGRI and then use NGRI all the way through your essay, as long as you write it in full once. The aim of the study, and this is part of your methodology, was to see if there were brain differences between NGRI murderers and non-murderers. So he had a control group here, which is also part of your methodology. Okay, so your participants, there were 41 murderers, 39 of them were men and 2 of them were women. They had a mean age of 34.3. The sample was obtained through an opportunity sample, which I'm hoping you're all aware of. It's when you go somewhere and you just take the opportunity to do your research on whoever is there at that moment in time. They'd all been charged with murder or manslaughter, and they had pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. The participants were referred to the University of California for examination to obtain proof of their diminished capacity. So the reason that they were insane or had a diminished capacity had to be proven as well. Now you'll notice there's elements of this that are in red. Those are the bits that are really important for your methodology here. Those are the specific little ingredients that we need to know when we're carrying out the study. Okay, so the reason that they were referred then is because they had some form of mental impairment. Okay, they were not guilty by reason of insanity. There was something dysfunctional or neurologically wrong with them. There's lots of numbers here, okay, but these are some of the reasons why they had that mental impairment. So 6 of them had schizophrenia, 23 of them had a history of head injury or organic brain damage. 3 of them had a history of psychoactive drug abuse. 2 of them had epilepsy, 2 of them had affective disorder, and so on. So they are those little bits of information that you can bring into your methodology here. Now, I know this is a lot of information and there's lots of numbers to remember. So when you're bringing in this mental impairment bit into your methodology, I would maybe look at 3 or 4 of them. I definitely wouldn't recommend trying to remember them all, because it's a lot, isn't it? Especially with your sample and your sampling technique as well. So maybe 3 or 4 of these and your answer would be great. Okay, so like I said, there was a control group. They were either a murderer or they weren't. So these are the controls that RAIN put in place. The participants were instructed to be medication free. Now that comes up again in our evaluation. They were not allowed to take any medication because that may have impacted on their behaviour, and we want everybody to be as neutral as possible. It was checked with a urine scan for 2 weeks prior to brain scanning. So RAIN really made sure that it was checked in a scientific way, a way that couldn't really be faked. Okay, and then like I said, there was a control group, and this was a matched pairs design. Okay, they matched their participants. Each murderer was matched with a normal individual of the same sex and gender. So there was again 39 males, 2 females. The 6 schizophrenics were matched with 6 schizophrenics from a mental hospital. None of them were taking medication. Okay, so it's that control group that you can also bring into your methodology here. The IV and the DV, they're also something that you can bring into your methodology. Remember, our IV, our independent variable, is what changes in our study, and our DV, our dependent variable, is what is measured. So whether you're NGRI or not, that's what changes. And the DV, what's measured, is the brain differences. Okay, so something else to bring into your methodology. Okay, little recap with this one then of that methodology. These are probably the most important bits that I would bring into your answer. The fact that they're NGRI, the fact that there were differences in their behaviour, the fact that 6 of them were schizophrenic. There were 41, 39 of them were men and 2 of them were women. And I'm hoping from this, it's ringing bells in your head that make you think, oh, there's a gender bias here. Opportunity sampling in California. So I'm hoping the fact that it's from California is sparking ideas of it maybe being culture bias as well. The mental impairments, like I said before, maybe bring 3 or 4 of them in. They were medication free. That was tested with a urine test. They had a control group that they were matched with, and bringing in your independent and your dependent variable. So that's what I would leave for your methodology. And the procedure of RAIN. Now, when we're writing this, I really want you to think that you are telling somebody that knows nothing about this study what he did. So it's all about the detail, isn't it? It's all about having depth in your answer, as well as a range of different things you're talking about. So there's a lot of different steps in this study, and RAIN was quite controlled and standardised in his procedure, which helps us a lot when we're trying to gain marks when we're writing about it. So for the procedure section, we know that RAIN used a PET scan, patrician emission tomography, and it was used to study the active brain. All the participants were given an injection of a tracer. And the tracer was called fluorodeoxyglucose, or FDG. It's always favoured in the exam if you write things out fully, because it shows the examiner that you've got that little bit more knowledge. So fluorodeoxyglucose would be better than FDG, but if you can't remember it because you've got so much to remember, FDG is fine. This tracer was taken up by active areas of the brain, And it was possible to compare the brains of the NGRI and control group. So they were injected first, and then they were put through a PET scan. All of the participants were asked to do something called a continuous performance task, which has been abbreviated to a CPT. The task specifically aimed to activate the target areas of the brain so the investigators could see how the different areas functioned. So they were injected into a tracer, and then they had the continuous performance task to do, and then their brain was put through, well, they were put through a PET scan. Participants were given a chance to practice the CPT before they received the injection as well. This is the really important bit for the procedure because Rain used really specific numbers in his study. So number one, it says 30 seconds before the FDG injection, participants started the CPT, the continuous performance task, so that the initial task novelty wouldn't be FDG labelled. They just didn't want them to fumble with the continuous performance task, and they wanted to make sure they knew exactly what they were doing. So they let them have a bit of a practice. 32 minutes after the injection, the PET scan was done on each participant. It's really important in the exam that you look at the specifics. So 30 seconds before, 32 minutes after. What produced was 10 horizontal slices or pictures of the brain using something called a cortical peel and box technique, which allowed us to see active and non-active areas of the brain because they were represented with heat. So red parts of the brain were more active, blue not so active. The article provides precise details of the scanning techniques so that the study could be replicated. So Rain made sure that when you're reading his study, you knew exactly what you needed to do in order to replicate it and try it again. Okay, now I know that that was really fast, but those are your two main areas. You've got that methodological list, the fact that it was 39 participants, 39 males, two females, they're different types of brain abnormalities, their mental impairments, the fact that it was done in California and it was opportunity sampling, and the idea that they had the injection, they had a continuous performance task, and then they were put in a PET scanning machine. Well, an exam question for this. I've written an exam structure, an essay plan, okay, on how I would go about answering this question. And I would put it into 3 different sections. So, starting with the methodology, remember that methodology is your ingredients. What is it that you need to know about the study before you start it? So what is the aim? He wanted to see those brain differences between people that had pleaded guilty by not reason of insanity and people that hadn't. Who are participants? How old are they? What was the mean age? Are they male? Are they female? How many were there? What was that sampling technique? Okay, opportunity sampling. Were there any controls? Well, yes, there was a control group. It was matched pairs. The control group were medication free. This was tested with a urine scan. You need to make sure that you've got this wide range of knowledge and that you are explaining the points in detail. Now, that sentence is really important here because when we look at the mark schemes or when we're examining, we look for depth and range. Depth meaning detail, so how much have you spoken about, and range, how much of the study have you covered? Have you covered absolutely everything that Rain did, or have you just told us that they had a brain scan? Okay, that's where the marks are, showing us that yes, I know everything about Rain's study, but also I know all of the specific details as well. Do not just list the methodology, okay? It's really easy to say, oh, there was this many men, there was this many women, It was a control group, they were medication free, but we need to make sure that we're writing it in an essay style. Okay, so that's something to really think about. Does it read nicely? Okay, is it easy to follow? Once you've got that methodology, move on then to the procedure. And like I said before, the procedure is your recipe. What is somebody going to follow when they read it? What are they going to do? Are they going to be able to completely understand what Rain did in his study? So explain to the examiner the step-by-step account of what happened. First thing he did was, second thing he did was, there was 32 minutes before they did the PET scan. Pretend that they are recreating the study and you are writing a plan for them. That's something to always keep in your mind when you have a question looking at methodologies and procedures. Make sure you have a wide range of knowledge and that you are explaining the points in detail. Do not just list what they do. And then there's things to remember now. If you can't remember the details, do not make them up. Okay, if you are struggling to understand, or get across that it was an FDG, a fluorodeoxyglucose tracer, don't make it up. Say that they were injected. Okay, keep it simple, because when, as an examiner, if you read something and it's completely wrong, it doesn't look great. Whereas if it's slightly simpler but correct, it definitely goes more in your favour. So stick to the idea of, if in doubt, do without. Okay, if you're not sure that that's right, don't add it in. Be specific with your answers. Add as much detail as possible. Even if you think, oh, I think I'm going into too much detail here, you won't be. Okay, tell us that there was a PET scan that showed us the active parts of the brain. Tell us that there were 10 horizontal slices of the brain that looked at hot and cold areas. Tell us that it was peel and box technique. Go into that really in-depth detail. And then you don't need to conclude this question because it's an outline question. The only question that you need to conclude is when it says evaluate, or if it's a comparison question. So don't waste your time concluding something, okay? Just make sure you've got the facts. All right, so that is the overview of Rain's study and a little bit of exam technique. Moving on then to look at Bowlby. So Bowlby's study is from our psychodynamic approach, and it is your 44 juvenile thieves, their characters and home life. So I am looking here at the outline question again, up to a possible 12 marks, so loads of marks up for grabs here. So it's definitely a question that we need to get right. It's asking you to look again at the methodology and the procedure. So back to that little tip at the beginning. Methodology, it's our ingredients. Procedure is the recipe. All right, so Bowlby's study then, completely different to the quite scientific study that Rain did. So the study was a series of case studies. Okay, a case study is when you have one person or a group of people that share the same trait or aspect of life or behaviour, and they are looked at in lots and lots of detail. Okay, that's what makes a case study. This group as well, and it was used, but it wasn't an experiment because nothing was manipulated. Okay, his experiment looked at thieves, but what Bowlby did was he found people that had already done the theft. Okay, he didn't say to people, oh, could you go and steal something, please, because I would really like you to be in my study. Okay, he didn't have to manipulate any of the behaviour. The sample was obtained again through opportunity sampling because it was a child guidance clinic in London where Bowlby was already working. So he already had the opportunity to grab the sample, and he did whilst he was there. Bowlby wanted to analyse and look to see if there was an association between two groups, thieves and a control group of non-thieves. And he wanted to see Does having early separation, particularly from a mother or a maternal figure, influence your behaviour and possibly make you more likely to become a criminal? Okay, that's what he wanted to do. So, participants in his study then, and a key element of this methodology, there's 44 children, and it's that child guidance clinic in London. They were described as thieves, and stealing was one of their symptoms. 31 of them were boys and 13 were girls, and they were aged between 5 and 17. Now, again, with this, there's lots of specific numbers, but what's quite nice with this one is that 31 and 13 are the same numbers switched around. So hopefully that makes it slightly easier to remember the detail. They were graded in terms of the severity of their stealing. So grade 4 thieves, which was 22 of the children, had been stealing for quite a long time. And then grade 1 thieves had only committed 1 theft. So they all had something in common, but there was different sort of levels of how bad it was. 50% of them had an average IQ. So IQ is looking at intelligence levels. 15 of them were thieves, and they had above average IQ, and 2 thieves had below average IQ. So that's just another sort of variable, another factor that Bowlby included in his research. So again, the bits that I've put in red here, I would say are the most important elements of your methodology. Like RAIN, a control group was used, consisting of 44 children who attended the clinic. So they, again, were matched. The group was similar in terms of age, sex and IQ of the thieves. The difference between the two groups was whether they stole or not. And that's a really, really interesting point all the way through this piece of research, okay, those two control groups. It allowed Bowlby to really understand the difference in their behaviour. Okay, also within the methodology, and I suppose this is another element of your sample, they use the mothers. Now, obviously the study looks at maternal deprivation or children that have been separated from their mothers. So some children didn't have their mothers around, some of them were orphans, but where possible, the mothers of the thieves and of the control group were involved, and they were interviewed in order to assess the case histories of the children. So they wanted the mothers to explain what happened, what was the upbringing like, you know, did anything cause them to become a thief? Okay, a little methodological recap then of this one. So these again are your main ingredients. They were thieves, okay, and they wanted to look at the difference between thieves and non-thieves. I've written 44 murderers. There were 44 thieves there, sorry. There were 31 males and 13 females, and they were aged between 5 and 17. Opportunity sampling from a child guidance clinic in London, and it was a series of case studies. They looked at interviews, so they interviewed the children and they interviewed the mothers, and they also gave them an IQ test. There was also a control group, so that means that they were matched. The only thing different was whether they stole or not. Looking again at your IV and your DV, so what did they change in your study? Well, whether they were thieves or not, and what did they measure? Well, they measured the impact on behaviour, that maternal deprivation. And our mothers were also included in that as well, so they were part of the sample. So I would say that those are the most common elements of your methodology that need to be explained. You don't necessarily have to use them all, but in order to get a really good and show a really good understanding, it would be great if they could all be included, especially in a question like this, which is 12 marks. Okay, moving on then to this procedure. So on arrival at the clinic, each child was given a mental test. So it was an IQ test, and it was given by a psychologist, and it was done using a Binet scale. They also had their emotional attitude noted, okay? What did they think? Were they quite distressed? Were they rude? that was kind of noted down by the researchers. And at the same time, a social worker interviewed the child's mother and recorded details of the child's early psychiatric history. So lots and lots of data collected here, most of it qualitative data. You could argue that obviously the IQ test is quantitative data. So they're getting a really clear picture now of the children's upbringing and their childhood, which we know in the psychodynamic approach is the most important thing, okay? Because our childhood influences us when we're older. Both the social worker and the psychologist then reported to Bowlby, who interviewed both the child and the mother himself as the psychiatrist. So I've highlighted there 3 specialists that worked within this study: a social worker, a psychologist, and a psychiatrist. After this 2-hour examination, the team also looked at school reports and other reports of the children's behaviour and discussed their conclusions. So there was lots and lots of data that was collected and reviewed and looked at in this study, which I know that if you've evaluated this study, there isn't actually that much positivity around it. Okay, there aren't very many strengths, but one thing that you can argue is that there were definitely professionals involved in collecting the data, lots of data included, and qualitative and quantitative data. Many of the children continued to meet with Bowlby weekly over a period of 6 months or more, making the study slightly more longitudinal. Mothers also talked over problems with the social workers, so they were given that little bit of help and that little bit of support even after the initial sort of study had taken place. These meetings enabled a detailed case history to be recorded and allowed Bowlby to diagnose the children's emotional problems. He did have a lot, didn't he? He did have a lot of data that he could have used. It's a really good thing because it allowed him to really understand why they stole. What was it about their childhood? Okay, so going back then to this question, outline the methodology and procedure of Bowlby's study, 44 juvenile thieves, their characteristic and home life, for 12 marks. Going back to this essay structure, all right, what's the aim of the study? What did Bowlby want to know? Who did he use? Who were his participants? Tell me their age. Tell me how many males and females there were. The fact that they were between 5 and 17 is quite significant, isn't it? Because it's a real range of ages. What's the sampling technique? Okay, opportunity sampling, because he was working in that child guidance clinic in London. Were there any controls? Yes, there was a control group. They were matched on everything, but the difference between the two, so our independent variable, is whether they stole or not. Make sure you have a wide range of knowledge and that you are explaining the points in detail, okay? So any sort of small elements that you may think, oh, that's not important, it will be, and it will definitely get you marks in a question like this. Again, don't just list the methodology. Tell me about it, okay? The aim of the study was this. The participants that he used were, he had a range of ages from 5 to 17. Then, once you've covered your methodology, move on to your procedure. I would use this essay structure exactly how it is here on the screen. So start with your methodology. Once you've got all of that down, then do your procedure. If you start to muddle them up, you're more likely to leave something out, which is what we don't want. So once you definitely think you've got everything for your methodology, then explain in detail what Bowlby did, or Rain. So explain to the examiner the step-by-step account of what happened and pretend that they are recreating the study. Okay, so first of all, they did that IQ test. After the IQ test, they noted the emotional attitude of the child and they went on from there. Make sure you have a wide range of knowledge and that you are explaining the points in detail. don't list them. Okay, am I getting this across to you? Listing is not going to get you any marks. It just doesn't show that you understand the study enough. Okay, it's not an A-level answer if you list the methodology or the procedure. And again, just some things to remember. If you can't remember the details, do not make them up. If in doubt, do without, okay? You could say there's a range of ages if you can't remember it's between 5 and 17. You're still telling me that you know there's a range, but you're not getting it wrong. Be specific with your answers. Add as much detail as possible, because it will really, really help get those marks. And again, because it's an outline question, don't conclude, okay? It's a waste of your time. In the exam for these types of questions, you would have probably between sort of 10 to 14 minutes to answer the question, which isn't very long, especially when you have to recall so much information. So spending time on a conclusion is just a waste of time, isn't it? It's making sure that you've got to get that methodology and procedure down, because they are the most important things. Now, my PowerPoint will be attached to the resources that will go on the e-sgol website, and you'll be able to print off the essay structure and use it. You could use it as a tick list to go through to make sure that you've got absolutely everything, as will all of the PowerPoint slides where I've listed the most important elements of the methodology and procedure as well. Just a reminder that the next session that I'm going to be doing next week will look at Loftus and Palmer, which is obviously your study from the cognitive approach, and Watson and Rayner as well, which is also known as your Little Albert study. So I'll be going through those studies, and we're going to have a look then at some example answers and see where the marks have been gained, what have they missed. So we're going to use our knowledge from this session and push it over to next session as well. So making sure that you can identify what's a really good solid answer and where an answer may need a little bit more detail. I hope that has helped. I hope it's made it clearer what you need to put into an essay question. Thank you very much for joining. If there are any questions, let me know, or type them into the question and answer box and I'll answer them the best I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
There aren't any questions now, so I'll end the session there. Thank you.
Thank you.